Today on GreenCars The Podcast, we talk with an EV service technician about how hybrid and electric cars are changing the world of auto maintenance. And I get behind the wheel of a new BMW iX M60. It all starts right now. Welcome to GreenCars The Podcast, where we talk about all things involving hybrid, plug-in hybrid, and electric cars. I'm Trish Close.
And I'm Dave Nichols. Today we delve into how maintaining electric cars is changing everything that happens in the service bay. We'll be bringing in an expert who was born to repair EVs, Mr. Tony Foley. And you know, Trish, he told me something that I never really thought about regarding repairing EVs.
Ooh, what's that?
When Tony first went to work for BMW electric vehicles, he noticed right away that it's very clean and very quiet. There's no revving of gas engines. There's no oil all over the place.
Exactly. It sounds more like a work bay at a computer repair shop.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Tony will have a lot to share with us about the servicing of electric vehicles and what is changing in the recruiting and training of new technicians. It's a whole new ballgame, I guess.
For real.
And speaking of BMWs, we put you behind the wheel of that new BMW iX M60. How was that?
Oh my gosh. As you'll see in my test drive, I call it the 3 Fs. It's fast, fancy, and fun. It's a true luxury EV SUV. It's a blast to drive.
Far out.
Exactly. Yeah. That.
You know, our producer thinks that a luxury EV, that it comes with like a hot tub in the back seat or something, and that you have to keep your pinky up while driving.
Oh. Yeah, and you asked for Grey Poupon.
Apparently.
Well, that sounds like something he would think, for sure.
Well, I'm looking forward to your review, but first, let's check out the latest EV news.
Here's what's up. BBC reports that one of the problems with owning an EV in many communities is the fact that a lot of people in urban areas don't have a garage and have to park their cars on the street, which makes plugging into a home charger impossible. We've talked about this very fact on this podcast. In England, 80% of the town of Nottinghamshire's residents have no access to private parking space and must park on the street. So, Dave, local city council is providing a free solution by creating a groove in the sidewalk outside residents' homes that allows them to run an extension cord safely from their front door to their vehicle.
That is ever so clever.
So clever.
Yes. And in the Darley area of Derby in the UK, they started an electric car share club to reduce the number of EVs on the road by carpooling. The city council is also using Department of Transportation money to install electric chargers on street corners.
That's interesting. Remember the story we reported on the BYD Seagull EV from China that cost only $10,000?
Yes, indeed. What is Build Your Dream up to now?
Well, they're back in our podcast, Dave, that's for sure. The company's launching a new next-generation Blade EV battery pack that will offer more range at a lower cost. Blade batteries are already being used by Tesla, Ford, Kia, Hyundai, Toyota, and other automakers, and they're a major reason BYD is such a big success. It says that by using lithium iron phosphate as the cathode material, these new batteries can be produced for less money. They're smaller, offering ultra long range, and they last longer. We're talking about a battery that can take you more than 600 miles on a charge.
Incredible.
Absolutely.
With 600 miles of range, there'll be no charge or range anxiety. It'll be a thing of the past.
Thing of the past, that is for sure.
You know, the GreenCars website features hundreds of articles about everything from the definition of types of fuel-efficient vehicles to understanding how electric batteries work, where things are going in personal transportation.
And I don't know if our listeners or viewers know this, but you wrote many of those articles, right?
I did indeed. And among them all, some of my favorites involve EV myths and misconceptions of one kind or another. We've covered such myths as that EVs are worse for the climate than gasoline cars. EVs don't have enough range for daily travel. There's nowhere to charge your EV, stuff like that.
Right.
It looks like we were ahead of our time, however, because a renowned auto journalist named Quentin Wilson has published a book called The Little Book of EV Myths. In its pages, we will learn the truth about such myths as the idea that electric cars are far from green, to which Wilson responds, the idea that a combustion car could be greener than an EV is bizarrely embedded in the internet.
Interesting.
Yes, and EV's carbon debt takes about a year and up to 17,000 miles to pay back, depending on the charging grid and how it's driven. explains Wilson. After that, it's a huge credit and there are no emissions.
So little book of myths, little book of myths.
Yeah, it's a little book of myths.
Digestible, if you will.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and don't forget, to get all the answers to all your hybrid or EV questions, all you have to do is go visit GreenCars.com.
And that's what's up, which brings us to our interview with EV technician Tony Foley.
Yeah, Tony Foley is a diagnostic and iCar technician from BMW Portland. Tony, we're so excited to have you on the podcast today. Thanks for being with us.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
So, Tony, tell us a bit about yourself. I understand you work on BMWs specializing in their electric powertrains.
Right. So I've been with BMW now a little over 10 years. Really started specializing in their electric powertrains back in 2014 when they were just starting to come out with some hybrid models. We didn't have anything fully electric when I first got into it, but the i3s were coming out shortly after. So really kind of hit the ground when the i3s launched, already ready to start working on them. But it was definitely a steep learning curve. But now it's everything I could want and more. It's a lot of fun. It's a very challenging environment. It's constantly evolving.
Tell us a little bit about, maintenance work on EVs, because there's certainly a lot less that can go wrong in an EV compared to a gasoline-powered car.
Right.
Can you kind of walk us through what maintenance work is like on an EV?
So the biggest things we're going to see on an EV for maintenance is going to be your scheduled maintenance. So things like brake fluid flushes, vehicle inspections. Outside of that, you're talking about wear items, but even then the scale is shifted a bit. So you're going to be dealing with brake components like the brake pads and rotors themselves much less frequently on most of your electric vehicles because you're using the physical braking system much less because you're using regenerative braking in its place almost every time you stop. So you offset a lot of that brake pad wear, but most of the EV vehicles are much heavier than their gasoline counterparts, and especially the ones that are rear-wheel bias. You see a lot of rear-wheel torque that is applied for both acceleration and regenerative braking, whereas on a gas vehicle, you bias that towards the front for braking. So your tire wear is usually exaggerated just by the vehicle weight, and in some cases, even more so by having a single axle that's doing a lot of your driving and braking force together. So, for example, i3s that we have, we usually see about a double tire wear rate from rear to front. So your rear tires, most people expect to go through about 2 sets of rear tires for every 1 set of front tires, which on most gas vehicles isn't the case. Usually they're spread pretty evenly on a rear-wheel drive vehicle unless you're really heavy on the throttle all the time, because your fronts do your turning force at that point, your rears do your acceleration, and they both do the braking. Outside of tires, you've got wipers, basic fluids like washer fluid, things like that.
Tony, let's talk a little bit about the maintenance of 12-volt batteries.
So we're seeing a different failure mode in these 12-volt batteries in that you don't get a lot of warnings typically. The vehicles are actually building and monitoring systems on these 12-volt batteries so that they can kind of monitor what their state of charge may be. But when you're talking about the small 12-volt batteries that most electric vehicles have, it becomes much more intolerant of battery faults in terms of how much buffer you have before you have a vehicle failure. And when you lose a 12-volt battery on an electric vehicle, even though you may have a huge high-voltage battery pack that can drive the car for 300 miles underneath your feet, it still requires the 12-volt battery system to activate that. And if your 12-volt battery has died, your car is going to act like it's completely dead, even though you're sitting on enough energy to run your house for a couple days. And so that 12-volt battery is really crucial for the car in maintaining its safety systems, because part of what we talked about in making these cars safe is making sure we have a control system that doesn't allow any power out of that high voltage battery if the car isn't 100% sure it's safe to do so. So 12-volt battery is still very important on these vehicles. Even though we're not using it to crank an engine, we still have to have it to do all of our safety checks before we can activate that high voltage battery and close contactors so the rest of the car has power. So that's why they're adding it as a maintenance item. For BMW, it's usually every 4 years they're recommending a 12-volt battery on these electric vehicles. Some of the other manufacturers are even adding it even sooner. Every 2 or 3 years is a recommended maintenance interval for the 12-volt batteries. It's an important thing because it's going to leave you stranded and you don't get the clues that you normally would get. A gas car, you can hear, it's really cranking pretty slow this morning. That's your clue that your 12 volts got something going on with it. We don't see that a lot of times on the electric vehicles. So following that maintenance schedule becomes really important.
As far as challenges go, have you faced certain challenges working on EVs that necessarily maybe didn't exist working on ICE vehicles?
Yeah, a couple that come to mind with that is charging issues. That's one of the big things that has been kind of tricky to nail down for working on an electric vehicle is customers that are having problems charging their car. A lot of times it's an intermittent problem. And when it happens, they're not at the dealership. They may not even be at home. They may be at a public charger. They plug in and the car won't charge. So now we have to deal with the separation between, is it a car problem or is it a charger problem? And a lot of times we don't have the charger to test. So that kind of makes it difficult to consistently reproduce these problems and to really narrow down, do we have a problem with the car, or was this a problem with the charger, or say an environmental problem even? The last person dropped the connector in a puddle and it was now full of mud and gunk and it couldn't plug in all the way. We don't have all of those answers. So the best we can do is test it with known good equipment here. So we've had to invest in having charging equipment on hand, both 110 volt, 240 volt wall boxes, and even DC fast chargers on site, so that we can test these cars and try to get to the bottom of, is there an issue with the vehicle, or was this maybe more of a problem with the station they were at that time?
Have you owned or regularly driven any electric vehicles yourself? And what's that experience like for someone who, like you, is a bit more technically familiar with the vehicles?
So I really think that helps a lot with working on them, is owning them and driving them. When I first started working on the i3s, I didn't have an electric car. I drove a gas vehicle, as did pretty much every other technician in our shop. But we started working on them and we realized we didn't quite have the understanding of what was going on with these vehicles and what was normal and what wasn't. So when we started seeing employee lease deals on these i3s, I hopped on it pretty quickly and very quickly learned that it was a totally different driving experience. Since then, I've had 6 i3s plus a couple mobile service vehicles that I sit in regularly and have put almost 40,000 miles on. We've got a mobile service iX I've had quite a bit of seat time in, and then I've also got a couple other off-brand, meaning not BMW, in vehicles that are electric as well. So it's definitely been at first it was very different, and now I wouldn't go back. I love the electric drive powertrains. I love how they feel. To me, it's the preferred way to drive at this point.
Did you have any range anxiety when you first started out? Did you ever get stranded anywhere?
I did, but I'm the kind of guy that doesn't like to be surprised. So I actually did it on purpose. When I got my first i3 in 2014, it was a BEV model with no range extender and no DC fast charge. And knowing that, I predicted I was going to run out of battery at some point. So I wanted to know how it would behave. So I took it to the bottom of a hill out here in Portland with 5 to 10% battery remaining and just started driving up the hill and just kept going until it brought me to a stop. And so I knew how it behaved. I knew what it would start doing. I knew how much I had to go past empty, if you want to relate it to a gas vehicle. And then when it was done, allowing me to drive forward, I just put it in reverse, backed and did kind of a 2-point maneuver and turned around and just came back down the hill and regenerated as I went down. And by the time I hit the bottom, I had 3 miles of battery range back again. So that was my way of kind of heading off that range anxiety. And ever since then, I've not had a problem with it. I've learned how to adapt. I learned how to look ahead, kind of figure out, I've got 20 miles to go. I'm at 30%, but I'm using, say, 1.5 miles per percent that I have left. I can start doing that math ahead of time. And so I don't get in a pinch at that last 5 or 10%. It's just kind of become an adaptation, kind of like a gas car. You figure out if you've got enough range based on how quickly you're used to your needle going down. This is the same thing. It's just a little bit different on how you think about it and where you look to get electricity back. You don't go to a gas station. You find some place with a fast enough charger to meet your needs for that day.
Well, we are definitely talking to a car technician today. I love it. You said off-brand. You mentioned off-brand, Tony. Have you worked on any other EV manufacturers' vehicles?
I have. So a few years ago, I actually went to work for a company based out of Eugene called Arcimoto. And Arcimoto is a startup company making electric reverse trike vehicles. So they are 3-wheel motorcycles, 2 wheels in the front, but they're an all-electric powertrain. And they are brand new. I actually started following the company back in about 2015, put a reservation down for one myself just because I thought it was a cool platform, and ended up buying one in late 2020. And that was actually my first electric motorcycle, if you will. But then I started asking them a bunch of questions and they didn't know how to answer them because I was asking deep questions like, hey, I want to add these accessories. How much current can I pull from this circuit? And I ended up getting a call from the service director and he's like, hey, we either need to have you sign an NDA or you can come work for us. So how do you want to do this? And so I started kind of talking to him about maybe being a subcontractor up here in Portland, and ended up going to work for him for about 6 months as a mobile mechanic. And then I actually moved into their engineering department, and we worked on sustaining engineering, keeping the cars on the road, looking for, defect trends, things like that, trying to head them off. And that was really eye-opening, getting on the engineering side of things rather than just the repair side of things at a dealership. Being able to see that side of the coin gave me a lot of experience and allows me to interpret things that I'm seeing at the dealership in a different way. And it helps kind of bring the repair cycle full circle, if you will. It was very beneficial. I truly enjoyed my time there. Great company.
I was just wondering if you kind of grew up around playing with electric cars and toys and things like that, because it sounds like, many people who are mechanics on gasoline cars, their dads sort of had them tear apart motors and when they were just little, and I see that quite a lot. What about you?
So my dad did like to buy cars and fix them. However, he would buy cars that were, say, for example, flood cars. So they had a lot of electronic problems, more so than, engine problems and things like that. Sometimes we'd have to do engine work, if they ingested water while they were running. But a lot of what we did was electrical repairs. So he'd buy these cars. They would be flood damaged, so the connectors would have all been underwater if they were on the floorboard. So that was what we did growing up, and that was kind of Dad's hobby. But Dad and Mom also both worked in the IT fields. So I would get old PCs and old phones and things like that they'd bring home. And I just got to play with them, tear them apart, see what broke on them. If they were broken, try to put them back together. If they worked before, my goal was always to make them work again when I put it back together. And so I really got deep into the electronics world, even more so than cars. I was never the guy that was going to go out and, add a turbocharger to my car to make 75 more horsepower because I wanted to go out and race on the weekends. That was never me. I liked doing sound system upgrades. I liked, adding cool features to the car, like cool lighting systems and customizing the experience. The performance side, I was usually happy with what they came with stock. So I kind of had a different car upbringing, if you will, and that we lived on the electronics side of the cars. And so I was very familiar with vehicle wiring diagrams by age 10, and helping my dad figure out where we were losing voltage on our lines or where we were having CAN bus problems. So definitely a different upbringing, but I think that's kind of helped steer me to where I am today and that kind of natural gravitation towards working on the electric vehicles.
I'm a little fascinated with the transition from mechanics who work on gas-powered cars to now technicians who are working on EVs. When you decided to specialize in EV work, tell us what that transition was like. I mean, I'm assuming a lot quieter, a lot cleaner.
Yeah. The first reason that I went for it was we didn't have a lot of guys that wanted to do it. It was kind of an open door opportunity of, hey, who wants to do this? Because nobody wants to. And I wasn't that way. I was always willing to go to training, and I loved already the hybrid training that I had, the work that we were doing on the hybrids. But getting to start with the EVs was a totally different experience. The first time I pulled one in and we ended up having a big repair job on it, by the time I was done, I had a little bit of coolant on the floor, and that was it. And that was amazing to me because we're used to having power steering fluid, transmission fluid, engine oil, coolant, all of these things mixed together if you're pulling drivetrains out of a car. I had a little bit of coolant, and even then it was a little bit, I didn't have a huge coolant mess to clean up. And the drivetrain all came out as one unit. It was pretty compact. It was all well put together. And like you said, it was much cleaner. I didn't have the same level of grime buildup on the powertrain that I would normally see on a gas engine. But it's really more the way it's all put together. You're not dealing with multiple systems that have to all tie in together. The car is built with a single powertrain, a single purpose. You have battery cables coming from the battery, going up to the motor controller, and then from there, from the motor controller out to any accessories you have. But it's all based on the same system. You don't have an evaporative control system, a crankcase ventilation system, all of these different subsystems that have to play in on a gas vehicle. And it really cuts it down, makes it simpler, and really made it more pleasant for me personally to work on them. And half of your diagnostics are done with a computer or a voltmeter versus having to look for engine knocks and different noises and things like that you were used to working on with gas vehicles.
Did the other technicians that you've worked with have a similar experience?
So coming into this podcast, we kind of expected we'd have this kind of a question. And I knew that my experience was probably not the same as everybody's. So I asked around, and guys in the shop overwhelmingly were saying that safety was their first question. And to me, having the electronics background, I wasn't as afraid of the cars as I was curious about them. But a lot of the guys coming from working on a regular gas car where you have a 12-volt system were pretty intimidated by going up to something that's multiple hundreds of volts in a battery pack. But then we started going through, and BMW does a great job with their training curriculum. And the first thing that you do with a high voltage class is you understand the safety systems that are on board. And you understand the great lengths that BMW went to protect you from coming in contact with high voltage on accident. So the safety process for BMWs is incredible. They give you a visual notification when everything is safe to work on, and there's no question. The special tools were something that a lot of techs have been worried about. As a technician, you spend quite a bit of money building up your toolbox over time with all the tools you need to work on the cars. When you start talking about a totally different powertrain, and now techs are getting a little worried about how much they're going to have to spend now to add these tools to their toolbox and things like that. With working at the dealership, it's nice because a lot of those tools are considered special tools, and those are ones BMW ships out to the dealerships as just part of a program where they do that with any new car that comes out. So we have now a whole dedicated area of just iCar tools that are just for the electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids that we have. And that saves you having to buy them personally. So the dealership techs definitely have an advantage in that area, but that's another big concern that we were getting from technicians, especially in the independent shop world, that the tool investment was going to be substantial and potentially prohibitive from being able to work on these vehicles once they came out.
Yeah, legit concerns. I'm glad you brought up independent shops. Are you seeing more in your area popping up that are servicing EVs?
So we definitely are starting to see them. We've had a Toyota hybrid shops in the area for quite a while, but that's because the Priuses have been out now for 15, 20 years almost. So those ones have been around for quite a while, but seeing the ones that were willing to work on the German high voltage systems, those are just now starting to gain a little bit of traction. So personally, I know of a couple that have actually hired dealer techs that were high voltage certified when they left. So they've kind of been able to get a leg in the door that way, kind of give themselves a head start, and having the experience and the training coming with those dealer technicians to be able to work on the cars. But again, you're back to all of these special tools that the dealer techs were trained to use are at the dealership. And so either the independents are going to have to buy them, you're going to have to find an alternate tool set, something along those lines. So the ones that I know of that are starting to work on these hybrid cars are kind of starting off slowly. They're doing basic things. They're willing to tackle mechanical projects, but they're very cautious in accepting everything because they don't want to get in a situation where they say they can do it, they get halfway into a repair, and now they need a tool that costs them multiple hundreds of dollars to buy just to be able to finish the repair. So it's a process, and I don't think it's going to happen immediately, but they are definitely trying to gear up to that point.
What advice would you give to an auto technician who's thinking of getting into being an EV technician, or say someone who isn't even a technician yet, but who wants to get into the world of EVs?
So first thing I'd say is come on in. There is tons of need right now. Electric vehicles are not slowing down in terms of how many we're selling, the volume of them that are out there. There's enough cars on the road now that they're not going to go away. They're not just a little niche market anymore. You have Teslas that were the number one selling car in the world last year. They're not going away. So the more that we can get now and start getting trained, the better situation we're going to be in a couple years. And that's just opportunity for a technician, because now you're starting in a market where some of the previous technicians are reluctant to get into it for whatever reason. So getting your foot in the door now, getting that training built up before we're seeing a huge market share of vehicles being electric on the road is going to put you in a much better situation in just a couple years when that market share starts to creep up and we're seeing more electric vehicles outside of warranty that need those repairs. And it's not as intimidating as it sounds. They are an electric vehicle. There is a high voltage battery, but it is still a car. Your chassis components are all the same. Your interior components are still all the same. Your infotainment. A lot of the problems you're going to see are similar to a gas vehicle in terms of somebody hit a curb, bent some suspension components. You're going to quote the ones that are bent and replace them, perform a four-wheel alignment. Nothing is different between a regular car and a high voltage car. But when you're talking about manufacturers that are moving product lines to an exclusive electric vehicle, Now you're talking about needing that familiarity with both the electric powertrains and the regular gas parts. So you're still going to get to work on regular vehicle parts, even if you're specializing in the electric powertrains. And vice versa, the electric powertrains don't exclude you from working on a gas car. A lot of our technicians that are high voltage certified still have hobbies in the gas vehicle world, still enjoy tinkering with their own cars at home, still work on them on the line here at work. So don't shy away from it just because it sounds intimidating. A lot of manufacturers are going to huge lengths and effort to make these cars safe to work on. And there's a lot of standards that are in place to enforce that. So once you learn how to properly work on the vehicle, it just becomes nuts and bolts like any other car. You just have to make sure you're following process and slowing down, taking the time to learn it the right way, so that when you're working on these cars, you are safe and you can get it done correctly the first time. And then, just like any other job, you're being productive and it's all going to work out well.
Tony says, don't be scared. Just do it.
Don't be scared.
Right. Jump in.
So, Tony, there's a question we've been asking a lot of our guests, and that's, if you could drive any EV, what would it be?
So it would really depend on if cost is a factor or not. If I'm not buying the car, I'm not paying for it. I really enjoyed driving some of our i4 products. They're just like a regular BMW. They drive just like it, but the torque is phenomenal. The silent drive is amazing. They have a lot of really cool infotainment tech inside of them. They're nice and comfortable, and it's big enough for our family. So we've got a lot of really cool EVs here, but the i4 kind of fits my typical vehicle style. The iX is nice as well, but it's a little big. I don't know that we need that big of a vehicle. So the i4 would really be my choice of, if I just had to pick one to drive, that would be the one I'd go for. It'd be the i4, probably the M50i. If you're going to go big.
Go big or go home. Tony, what car are you currently driving?
So right now I've got an Arcimoto FUV, that reverse three-wheel electric motorcycle we talked about, and then I've got a BMW i3. My backup car, I do have a regular gas or ICE 3 Series BMW. That's more my long-distance trip car because my i3 doesn't have DC fast charge. But I use it maybe once a month, and that's usually if I have to go out of state or something like that. Otherwise, I've got a 1997 Selectria Force, which was a Geo Metro that Chevy originally sold to a company to retrofit to full electric before the car was even built. So they rolled the chassis off the line with no engine or transmission, shipped it to Selectria, put an electric powertrain in it, and then took it back to the GM dealers to sell it. So I've got one of those as well that we've actually been upgrading the battery pack on. So it's got a hybrid now of BMW batteries and the original Selectria drive motors in it. So that's my additional backup car. As any mechanic, usually you have multiple project cars sitting around in your driveway. But yeah, 3 of my 4 cars are all electric of varying degrees. And again, I love it. I love the electric powertrain. I enjoy just, geeking out on them, figuring out what I can make better. Yeah, it's just a fun thing. A lot of guys like tinkering with engines. I tinker with electric motors. I've got way too many electronic components sitting in my garage right now. Just that I've saved off vehicles that have various failures so that I can kind of combine parts and put them back together and fix vehicles that may otherwise be going to the junkyard because it's too expensive to buy the components.
Well, we can absolutely tell your passion for electric vehicles and all the tinkering. We can see it.
Yep, we're really glad to have you. Thanks so much for your time today, Tony.
No problem. Thank you guys.
Man, passion with a capital P, that guy.
He was born to do this job.
He was. He truly was.
Yeah.
Just absolute genius, I think, when it comes to servicing EVs.
And now it's time to squirt some brake fluid on your questions from home as we plunge into the dank GreenCars Mail Bag. What do we have, Trish?
Our first letter comes from Eddie Benjamin of Sparks, Nevada, no pun intended, who writes, which electric car currently gets the most range?
Well, thanks for your question, Eddie. That would, of course, be the gorgeous Mercedes EQS. It will take you 441 miles on a charge, topped only by the Lucid Air Grand Touring sedan, which will take you 516 miles before you need to plug in.
Wow. Let's take a look at some of the comments we're getting on social media. We received a number of Instagram posts about self-parking features, which is my favorite. Big Boss 81 writes, how can you trust a self-parking car?
Well, Big Boss, in self-parking mode, you're still in control of the braking of the vehicle. So as the car steers and maneuvers into a parking spot using cameras and sensors, you still regulate the speed of the vehicle. According to AAA, 81% of drivers who use self-parking had fewer curb strikes, were able to park 10% faster, and with 47% fewer maneuvers.
Wow. Parking faster is definitely a perk in my book. I recently experienced an EV that can park itself. And Dave, I'm going to say it's bananas. It's crazy.
You must be talking about your road test of the BMW iX M60.
Yes.
Let's take a look.
Take all the perks of an electric car, add in the luxury of a BMW, and you get this, the iX M60. This car not only feels like it's built for speed, but there's a comfort level here that puts it in a class all its own. There were a lot of oohs and ahs the second I opened the door. I love the gemstone look and feel of the seat controls and driver preferences right on the door that carries over throughout the car. The more I drove this around town, the more I appreciated the curved display across the dashboard that didn't obscure any views or feel intrusive, but also big enough for me to see all the features at a glance. While the display itself is fairly easy to use and navigate, it did seem a bit overwhelming at first. There are a lot of apps. It took me a few minutes to find the right one for what I was looking for. I'm sure after time I'd be able to navigate through the apps with ease. Getting back to comfort, the iX is beyond comfy. Driver's seat feels luxurious and there's so much room throughout the entire vehicle. I love that when I turned on the heated seat and steering wheel button, it also heats up that center console. Here's something else that heats up. My favorite playlist. There are, get this, 30 strategically placed speakers within the car. 30! Some even live in the seats for the full experience. There are so many safety features in the car, which is great, but I was really loving the car's parking assistance feature. In reverse, it asks you if you want front parking assistance or reverse parking assistance. You pick and then really sit back, let the car do the dirty work for you. This may go without saying, but the car is fast, super duper fast, and that comes in handy when you're trying to get on the freeway or pass cars. It does it all with ease, all while keeping in line with a smooth, comfortable ride. I'm not sure I got enough time to explore all the incredible features that come with the iX, but again, combining the latest technology with all the luxury that simply comes with a BMW is why this is the ultimate driving machine.
Great story, Trish.
Thank you.
And you can see the extended 9-minute version on YouTube.
It's 9 minutes of me talking to myself in the luxury BMW. Yes.
We want to thank you all for your comments. We love to hear from you. If you're watching these episodes, drop us a comment on our YouTube channel. Or if you're listening to the podcast, leave us comments on our social media platforms.
Yes, we love reading your comments. Don't forget, when it comes to EVs, stay informed and stay charged. We'll see you next time. Follow us at GreenCars HQ. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Email us, thepodcast@greencars.com.